I want to tell you guys today why I became a think tanker. Yes, think tanker. Why I'm passionate about public policy. As some of you know, I am a surgeon. And every time I walk into the operating room, and for the many hours that I am there, my focus is on one patient, one person who is in front of the operating room table. One set of vital signs, one or multiple operations to perform, but really one life. One life. I remember vividly a few years ago, one of my recent patients, 34-year-old young woman, mother of two, who was just minding her own business when she sustained a gunshot wound to her abdomen. This was from a drive-by shooting. She was in a neighborhood, in her own neighborhood, not somewhere else, but the gang warfare in her neighborhood had made her an unfortunate victim. So when she showed up in our hospital, our well-trained team pounded immediately as we are trained to do. Everyone doing everything we know to give her an opportunity to survive. And within 5 minutes, we're rushing her to the operating room to hopefully control the bleeding. It was very clear she was bleeding. And to repair the damages that we anticipated to our organs. The operation itself was not an easy operation. There was massive bleeding. The bullet had gone through her liver with a very large destructive injury. And after we were able to control the bleeding, we saw that there was more bleeding welling up from behind her liver. Really a nightmare for a surgeon. And as we searched desperately to try to find where the bleeding was coming from, we realized that the bullet had torn a big hole through her large vein in her abdomen, the vena cava. For us, we were very happy to have found the injury. So we quickly fixed the injury. Now, an average adult has approximately 10 pints of blood. During the operation, my patient had received 26 pints of blood, more than double her blood volume. With the injury controlled, we took her quickly to the intensive care unit. 1 month later, and after 2 other operations, we were able to discharge her home to her family. Now, you can see why I love doing surgery. I don't think I can stop doing surgery. But every time I walk out of the operating room, I carry both the satisfaction of what we did in the operation and also the weight of what surgery cannot do. Now, when I was studying at Johns Hopkins, Bloomberg School of Public Health in Baltimore, I encountered something that really changed me. It was not a lecture, it was not a professor, but it was 8 words on the wall, 8 words. It was the school's tagline: protecting health, saving lives, millions at a time. Millions at a time. I remember standing in front of that wall multiple times and doing the mental arithmetic that I know many of my colleagues and surgeons and physicians do. Even if I operated every day for 50 years, the number of patients I touch, the number of lives I touch is finite. A few thousands. But millions? I don't think so. So the question that formed in my mind was, what could I do that could impact millions at a time? What could I do? The answer I found out after a lot of soul searching was policy. Policy change. Because if you change how a government finances health system, you do not affect one person. You affect an entire population and every generation that follows that. That's how we started Carrefour Policy Institute in Cameroon. Now, from the very beginning, we knew that creating a think tank was the easier part of the whole equation. The harder question, and the one that we've been living with for 14 years, is not whether we produce good research. We are well trained. We do very good research, and I'm sure many of you would agree here that you all do very good research. The harder question for us was, does anyone trust us? Trusted by whom? Were we trusted by the citizens of Cameroon and Central Africa region, whose lives our research was meant to improve? Were we trusted by the government, who have the power to implement our recommendations? Are we trusted by funders and international partners who support our operations? These, to me, are not the same questions. And in my experience, the answer to each of these questions is different, and the difference matters enormously. So this afternoon, I want to honestly explore that question with you all today. Not as an exercise in self-congratulation, but as a genuine reckoning for what legitimacy means for many think tanks in Africa, where we get it wrong and what it will really take for us to get it right. As we know, the conference theme today is Think Tanks and Trust. It's a very good theme. Thank you, Kike and the team. But I want to warn you that trust is harder to build than it looks from the outside, and far easier to lose than we expect. I know this because I have lived it. Let me begin quickly with a framework. When we ask whose trust African think tanks must earn, three distinct audiences come to mind immediately. Each of them wants something totally different. The first audience is government, or policymakers in general. Governments really are the most consequential audience for think tank work. They mostly control the policy environment and implement or reject whatever recommendations we make. They often want think tanks to be useful on their own terms, to produce research that, as some of us have highlighted here, that validates their priorities or provides technical cover for decisions they've already made. And when a think tank produces genuinely inconvenient findings, the most common government response is not to engage. It is to question the institution's funding, its motives, or its methodology. That's the government for you. The second audience is funders. And for many African think tanks, international funders are not merely supporters. They are existential dependencies. And I say this in this room with many partners here and funders, some of whom have been very indispensable to institutions like ours, precisely because this tension really deserves to be named and to be spoken out among friends. Funders sometimes measure success in ways that make sense within the ecosystem of international development, whether it's publications, convenings, media mentions, but they may not have any serious relationship to whether the research produced any tangible policy change or influence within the environment. Now, the uncomfortable truth is that some African think tanks, and maybe in other places, but I know very well the African sector, some African think tanks are highly trusted by funders and completely unknown in their own countries. This is not legitimacy. It is simply performance. The third audience for me is citizens, and I would argue the most important and the most neglected audience. Across the continent, most citizens have never heard of many of our think tanks that claim to represent their interests. They've never heard of us. They are object of study, but not partners in inquiry. And if a think tank claims to advance the public interest but cannot really demonstrate that the public has any meaningful relationship to its work, I think that claim is at best aspirational. So many of you, I think all of you in here, you all know very well that the demands of these three audiences are frequently in very direct conflict. What earns you government trust may cost you funder trust. And what satisfies funder accountability may do nothing about citizenship legitimacy. What creates genuine community accountability may look methodologically unsophisticated to both the government and the funder. There is absolutely no formula for resolving this tension. But the first step, which to me is the most difficult step, is for us to stop pretending that the tension does not exist. I want to say something which is rarely said aloud in these gatherings. The legitimacy that most African think tanks claim is in significant part borrowed. It is borrowed. This is not built from inside out. It is imported from outside in. Many African think tanks evaluate themselves using frameworks not designed for the context in mind, and I know it's been raised here before, context matters. A policy brief for DC is not the same as for Abuja or for Yaoundé. And it is a question of epistemology. Whose knowledge counts? Whose knowledge counts? And many African think tanks would depend primarily on international peer review for their credibility, are in a real sense asking for permission from institutions external to the context that they are trying to serve. I have experienced this directly. Because when CAFU publishes research that's picked up by international media, we feel legitimate. When we publish research that influences Cameroon's Ministry of Public Health, we feel effective, very effective. These are not the same thing. And for too long, in too many of our institutions, the first has been mistaken for the second. There is also some, what I call legitimacy rent. Legitimacy rent that operates within our sector. Institutions receive financial support and visibility in exchange for outputs that serve their external supporters' accountability needs. That legitimacy is very real, but it is borrowed. And when the funding ends to your institution, what remains? Is it an institution with deep roots to its community? One that published well, presented at conferences, but was invisible where it mattered most? And we and CAFU have declined funding that would have required us to compromise on our editorial independence, not out of self-righteousness at all, but because borrowed legitimacy is not durable legitimacy. And durability is ultimately what matters most to us. Now, I don't want to leave you all only with a diagnosis, because even though I'm a surgeon, in medicine, diagnosis without treatment is just an incomplete consultation. You can't really bill for that. So let me offer some treatment. 3 principles. Principle number 1. Legitimacy must be earned locally before it's claimed globally. Must be earned locally. The most durable legitimacy a think tank can possess is built at home. Through their relationships with government officials, through civil society partners, and through communities that recognize your name, share your work or your research because it reflected their reality. This is the part that cannot be manufactured through a communication strategy. It cannot be manufactured. It is built slowly through consistent presence and a willingness to be genuinely accountable to the people closest to the issues you're dealing with. I often think about my friend in Ghana, Franklin Kojo with the Imani Center in Ghana, who has done really consistent work holding politicians accountable to their campaign promises, the promises they made in their campaign manifesto. Imani's work is trusted by really all stakeholders because they do rigorous work and they have their ears on the ground. Principle number 2 is that independence must be structural, not rhetorical. Every think tank in this room, or argue, claims independence. And there are some think tanks here who are not independent. They didn't think so. But independence is not a characteristic that can be asserted. It is a property that must be structurally guaranteed and repeatedly demonstrated. And structural independence means that the think tank's governance and funding architecture is designed so that no single government, no single partner, or political actor can determine what the think tank studies or what it concludes. And in many African political environments, being genuinely independent is genuinely risky. But this itself is not an argument for timidity either. It's an argument for strategic courage. A demonstration is what earns trust from the audiences really that matter. My third and final principle is that trust must be earned from the people you serve, not claimed on their behalf. It must be earned, not claimed. Now, let me tell you about one of our most important failures. One of the earliest projects that we undertook at CAFU was working with informal market traders in Cameroon. We call them bayam-selams in Cameroon, predominantly women, to help them formalize their businesses. The logic was pretty straightforward, and the evidence was clear. Formalization offers access to credit, legal protection, business support, and a pathway for growth. Every development framework said this was where these women needed to be. And we were convinced we're doing the correct thing and the right thing. And we were wrong. We're completely wrong. When we sat down to talk with these market women afterwards for a debriefing, what we heard changed how we do policy work in CAFU. These women were not unaware of what formalization offered. My mom is one of them. I had grown up around them. I thought I knew. They had made a rational calculation that we completely missed. They did not trust the government. They had zero trust on the government. They had watched tax collectors show up unpredictably at businesses that had formalized, extracting payments that bore no relationship to what was in the law. They had developed their own systems for accessing capital outside formal banking networks. They had built networks for negotiating the informal fees and arrangements that governed their own markets. These systems were not perfect, but they were predictable to them, they were understood, and they were theirs. Formalization in their eyes was not an opportunity at all. It was an invitation for the state to reach into their lives in ways they could not control, in ways they absolutely could not control. We had designed a policy solution for a problem that, as we understood it, existed. But the people we're trying to serve understood the problem completely differently. And because we had not listened deeply enough before we designed our intervention, we had built something that served our theory and not their reality. We had claimed to be working for them, but we really were never truly working with them. And they knew the difference, even if we did not know that difference. That failure has stayed with me ever since, and is the lesson I return to every time and careful we begin a new project, every time I am tempted to assume that because an intervention is technically correct, it will be received the way we intended. The people you are trying to serve must trust you, not trust your credentials, not trust your methodology. They must trust you. And to earn that trust, your policies cannot simply be technically correct at all. They must be anchored in what people are actually asking for, built from an honest understanding of what their constraints are that they are actually dealing with, and also responsive to the fears that they are navigating. It also means that the trust has to be actively negotiated, not passively claimed at all. Trust is not a status that institutions achieve and then possess. It's not a status. It is a relationship that must be continuously maintained, renegotiated as circumstances change, and rebuilt when it is damaged. So, today I'm asking you a couple of things from this room. First, stop measuring your legitimacy by standards external to your context. And remember that the ultimate measure of a think tank's legitimacy is not the quality of its publications, even though it's very, very important, but it's the quality of the change it contributes to in the world. So, I began by talking to you about why I became a think tanker. The answer I arrived at was policy. But I did not know that for the last 14 years, what CAFU has taught me has been an eye-opener. The market women in Cameroon taught me about trust. The young woman I operated on that afternoon recovered and went home to her children, but the neighborhood she returned to is still there. The conditions that brought her to our operating room are still there. Only policy can reach those conditions, and only trusted institutions can shape that policy for the right way. And that's why I would argue our work matters. Trusted by whom is the question. To me, that is the question every think tank in this room should be asking itself today, tomorrow, and every day it publishes a report, convenes a dialogue, or speak in someone else's name. The answer you find will tell you everything you need to know about where you are, and also everything you need to do about where you need to go. So thank you.